The ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas, here's your update. Now we officially have confirmation that Hamas will be releasing hostages. But what exactly happened? Well, Hamas said they will not be releasing hostages on the second day of the initial swap between Palestinian prisoners and Hamas hostages. According to Hamas, and it sort of gives us an insight on how Hamas really is controlling a lot of the negotiations, Hamas said that there's no humanitarian aid, there's not enough trucks coming into northern Gaza, so if Israel is not going to uphold their side of the deal, Hamas says we're not going to uphold our part of the deal. So you have to see where Hamas really does pull the strings in this entire negotiation. I've been saying this since the beginning of this entire ceasefire. When it comes to a ceasefire, you need two countries to come to the table. And both of those countries need to have specific agreements. Otherwise, it's not a ceasefire. What you see Israel doing with their little 4-hour pauses, they're doing that because the United States and other countries are telling Israel, you need more humanitarian aid and more freedom of movement for civilians in a safe manner between northern Gaza, southern Gaza. Israel said fine. Now all of a sudden we find ourselves in a 4-day ceasefire, and Hamas is showing that, look, we can stop this at any point. Do you want your hostages or not? Now, one thing I do want to point out, and why Hamas also may have buckled and is okay with also releasing hostages, is the fact that Israel had said quite blatantly, well, if you don't release the hostages, we'll just continue this war in T-minus 4 hours from the time we make this announcement. And of course, all of a sudden, we now have a good deal where Hamas says, okay, good to go. Israel says, good to go. Let's do the prisoner and hostage swap. So that is currently what's going on. This is the second day of the ceasefire agreement at the time of making this video. Going into the third day, I hope things go more smooth. Something else I want to put into perspective is that there's not that much ease of logistics going into Gaza. It's actually quite complicated coming in from Egypt and then going from southern Gaza into northern Gaza. The specifications of where drop-off points were and how humanitarian aid is getting into Gaza is quite difficult because a lot of people in Palestine, they want that humanitarian aid. They need food, they need water, medication, and trying to disperse that in a 4-day period, even in a time of peace, would be extremely difficult. So imagine in a war zone, and you have these truckers who are going into the country who are probably not familiar of where they're supposed to go. This is quite a very difficult task. Now, something else I want to point out about this ceasefire is that Israel is not allowed to tell Palestinian civilians where they can go or not go. Right before the ceasefire, Israel did drop leaflets over southern Gaza to not come into northern Gaza. But there are a lot of confirmed reports that civilians from southern Gaza are currently migrating back up to northern Gaza to go and see what the damage is on their homes, in their areas. And are they allowed to do that? Technically, yes, that's their own sovereign territory. So if the civilians who went from southern to northern Gaza don't move, I don't know how Israel is going to be able to navigate all of this. They're initially going to have to start from square one. I'm not saying Hamas likes this or doesn't like this, but it definitely plays into the favor of the enemy of Israel because, look, Israel right now is being watched under a microscope. Everyone wants to make sure that Israel is a little more careful, and let's be honest, Israel was pinned back into a corner when it comes to this ceasefire agreement. It took a lot for Israel to do this. Israel has not been successful in getting hostages. That's the simple truth. I figured we'd play this clip. Here's an update from an Israeli doctor that talks about the hostages coming from Hamas's hands.
We saw the kids and the parents, the hugs and the crying, and it was very, very exciting for all of us. They are in good condition. And they are surrounded by our multidisciplinary teams, social workers, psychologists, nurses, and doctors. They are surrounded by the family, friends, and it was, I think, the most exciting evening that I had since I started my career. And we hope to see them all back.
Now, this had me thinking, I could only imagine the hostages coming back into Israeli territory, going through all their treatment. you have to assume that Israeli intelligence is going to be having a talk with the hostages. Maybe they can get some sort of information. Were you in a tunnel system? Do you remember how long you were in a car? Do you know if you were in southern Gaza? Like, where were you? What all happened? And this could be extremely traumatizing for these patients and for these former hostages to essentially relive the past. Now, what we do know is that one of the hostages did come out from the initial hostage swap, where 4 hostages at the beginning of the conflict were swapped back over to Israel. And the only way they were able to identify what they went through and what it was like being with Hamas, they said, imagine being in a spider web. And what they were describing was the tunnel systems when they were talking in context. Being in a spider web, there were corners, there were little nooks and crannies. They had no idea where they were. It was dark. This is how the hostages or the hostage had described the tunnel system. So again, Israel has a very tough task at hand once this ceasefire is over, unless Hamas wants to extend the ceasefire. It's going to be very difficult for Israel to find the rest of the hostages unless it's in this fashion where there's some sort of agreement and some sort of exchange.